Gary DePaul with Unlabeled Leadership. Welcome to episode 99. Mark McNally has the courage to embrace transparency. Here's a shout out to listeners from Kent, Ohio, Cedar Creek, Texas, Fairfax, Virginia, and Rockland, Wisconsin. With that, let's get started. Have you ever met a chief nobody? I have. His name is Mark McNally, and he's the founder and chief nobody at Nobody Studios. Mark is a product and marketing executive with experience in scaling companies from their initial startup to becoming a multinational organization. Throughout his career, Mark has been to 40 countries and been to almost all of the states in the U.S. He has his private pilot's license, speaks Spanish, and is a parent. I like how one professional describes Mark in LinkedIn. He writes, "It is rare that you come across a talent like Mark McNally. He's a natural-born leader and exudes the definition of entrepreneur. I know very few people with his drive, zest for success, and comprehensive knowledge to unite people, opportunities, and companies." I think that summarizes Mark quite nicely. Part 1. Shifting Gears to Maintain Balance. I think of leadership as a way of helping people grow mentally and morally. In other words, helping them build character. This can happen at the organizational level, at a department level, team level, or even at the individual level. Leadership can happen in big acts or small ones. The small ones can be just simply a statement or an observation, but those statements may have a profound effect on the listener. In this story, Mark talks about something that someone observed about him and told him that had a profound effect on how he viewed himself and how he works. Here's Mark to explain.
Something that I remember hearing early on that stuck with me, and I feel like I've gotten really better at this lesson even as of late, but it's something I feel like I've been learning for 20 years. I remember early in my career coming off a pretty important road trip with customers and investors. I had a pretty high profile company at the time. It had just been 5 straight days of being on stage every day, nailing it, having great meetings, just feeling pretty good about ourselves. Somewhere towards the end of it, kind of taking the pedal off the gas a little bit, feeling like you're at the back end of that trip. Maybe didn't take care of as much the sleep and the prep and et cetera. And the last day was one of the worst days of the trip. And nothing was fatal. Some meetings didn't go as good as they could have, and maybe weren't as fresh, as paired as we could have been. And somebody who was a peer of mine at the time, but has grown into a very good friend and mentor in a lot of ways, pulled me aside and said, "Mark, you've really carried this trip largely on your shoulders. I'm going to pay the biggest respect I can to you with a compliment, but then I'm going to tell you something that you need to listen to." And he said, "When you're at your best, I've never met anybody better. There's nobody better on this planet. Just when you're at your best. And you can tell when you make that your priority. And when you're not at your best, if you're not bringing your best for either rest or prep work or whatever it is, it can undermine a lot of the greatness that is what you bring to the table." And I remember at the time, I'm sure I had ego wrapped around with it. I'm sure there's a bunch of other psychological pushback to what I heard. But without anybody saying that to me throughout my career since, I've been hypersensitive to those moments. I think even coming off the pandemic's been an interesting time, right? Because there's, your life is blending, your responsibilities are blending, and everything is turned upside down in terms of your work schedules and your boundaries and stuff. I've been working this year in a lot of ways that has come back full circle. The journey we're on right now is as fun as anything I've ever done. The intensity is amazing. The reward is amazing in terms of just seeing awesome people, great ideas, seeing things get done every day. Going into the back half of this year, I've really come full circle to those statements and saying, I value so much around the people around me that they're consistent and they're reliable. I pride myself on being that way, but there's always room for improvement. And for me, I think I've made a personal choice to shift gears and find a new gear in terms of my ability to bring my best every day and level up the ups and downs. And part of that's just taking personal ownership of your own balance. And I think that's something that a lot of people are not very good at. The more we focus on taking care of ourselves and that balance, making ourselves the space to make sure we're taking care of ourselves and we can be the best for everybody else. That's something that's top of mind right now.
When we allow those stressors or lack of sleep and things like that, we can't be at our best.
Right.
Trying to set the conditions so that you can be at your best. When you're not at your best, having the people around you step in and give you the support that you need or give you the space that you need so you can excel and get back at it.
Yeah. At least for me personally, I'm my work ethic has never been questioned, right? So I'll do crazy hours, I'll wake up early, I'll stay up late, I'll work weekends, but you're the only person that controls that. If you don't put those boundaries, it's almost boundaries against yourself. I'm emphasis saying, okay, let me get the kids down, then I'll hop back on at 10 o'clock and I'll, get X, Y, and Z done before midnight. And when people are trying to fit things into my calendar, I'll say, okay, well, let's see, why don't you go ahead and throw it in at 6 a.m. because then, I can shift gears and focus on the kids getting to school by 7:30. And that's all great. And it's well intentioned. And there'll be a time and a place for it. I'll always invent time when it's absolutely critical, but you have to create the boundaries for yourself in order to make sure you create the environment that you don't hit walls, that you don't go down and have a bad day because you're exhausted or you have a bad night of sleep. I don't think that we're taught that. I think we actually expect a lot from each other, expect a lot from ourselves. The internet age, the technology age we've lived through, we're living a 24/7 work cycles like never before. And I think you're seeing it. I think you're seeing the side effects of that in terms of, mental health and other indicators out there. At the end of the day, your team can be there for you. They can cover for you. They can support you. But the only one that can manage your own boundaries and make the best choices for yourself is you. I don't think we talk about that enough.
When someone has a team, it seems that there's a responsibility for enabling your team to be at your best. And while they're responsible for their own actions and choosing their behaviors and how much they work, as the manager, you can create the right environment to enable your team to make the right choices so that they can be at your best.
That's 100% right.
Part 2. Trust is more powerful than spinning a narrative. When you listen to enough of these episodes, you'll pick up on a lot of themes. Many of the themes align with some of the leadership principles that I often bring up in conversation. For example, believe in others, connect with others, put others first. While these are simple principles, sometimes they're difficult to put into practice. In his first story, Mark described a small act that had a profound effect on him. In this one, Mark talks about something at a macro level that has a lot to do with that second principle I mentioned, connect with others. Again, here's Mark.
One thing that's become a bigger part of a theme in terms of my life and how I phrase things in business terms is the idea of embracing transparency. I don't think transparency is a binary thing that you either have it or you don't. I think that it's a constant thing for folks to realize when maybe they are holding things back or spinning something. It stuck with me early on in my career in one particular case. I was a fairly young executive. We had taken a company public. We were fairly early in SaaS-based revenue. So you're making monthly fees versus upfront big licensing fees. And all of our other competitors in the space were very much focused on getting big licensing fees. So the pressure was immense because we'd get compared to our competitors and their revenue would be multiples ahead of where we were because they're getting it all in one lump sum. The pressure to change the business model, the pressure to show Wall Street what they're asking for was immense. I recall distinctly a moment in an investment banker's office where it was kind of this epiphany where we said, okay, we have to actually not run away from this and feel sorry for, apologize for not having the same numbers. We have to lead with transparency. We have to invest in explaining. There's nothing wrong with the fact that our numbers are lower if they understand how our business model is better. But you've got to invest. You got to lean into that transparency and explaining. It's hard for people who haven't been there to understand the kind of pressure that you feel when you've got shareholders and stock price goes up or down every single day. And you've got 1,000 employees that, 10 times a day are refreshing their screen to see what happened to their net worth, let alone every meeting you go into seems to, the perception is you're either a good company or bad company based on how you were doing that week. That was the environment that I was living in back then. But it takes a lot of courage to just embrace transparency and say, let's talk about the realities of it. We actually built a tremendous amount of following and support from bankers who finally got their head around it and embraced it, actually started walking away from our competitors because they saw that we had a superior model. There's so many different ways to say, being courageous, embracing the truth, embracing transparency. One of the things we did when we started my current company is I studied every company I've ever been a part of. And I wrote down a list of pros and cons, or I should say things we did right, things we did wrong. The only consistent thing across every single one that we did wrong, on my notes, at least back then, it said narrative. And what I meant by that was how much time you spend spinning a narrative, whether it be, okay, we got to put out our quarterly report, or we got to write, update to investors, we got to write something to talk to our customers, we got to talk to our employees, we got a big meeting coming up at the end of the month. I estimated that we spent about 35 to 40% of our time in some form or fashion spinning a narrative. And I think what's happened, it's almost like we've gone from a different news cycle than we did like in the 50s, like today as everything is live. I think the human nature is that way now too. So it's almost like even spinning narratives is a waste of time, but it starts down this path. And I'm not going to call it dishonest, but if you're looking at the facts and you're saying, okay, how do I put that into a story? And you tend to say, how do I put that into a positive story? Then you're starting to omit certain things. You're starting to highlight or emphasize others. That becomes a lot of energy. And then other people get involved and saying, well, is that the right way to say it? Is that the right way to say it? You start to get into this murky area. Now, there's certainly people who stretch the truth for various reasons, and that's a different category. But I'm just saying we all get in this pattern. At least I have most of my career spent a lot of time spinning narratives. And I got to a point where I just decided that was a waste of energy. Not only was it taking a lot of time and doesn't really attach to any positive outcome, it's underestimating fundamentally where people and human beings are today. Like we have a pretty good sense of the BS sense filter, right? And what you're really trying to do, if you want to think about what's long-term defensible, in a day and age where companies come and go and people can switch jobs on a whim, the only thing that's long-term and defensible is trust and loyalty. And those are kind of really tightly intertwined. What do you need to lean on these days in order to really cultivate that? It has to be being vulnerable. It has to be being honest. It has to be being transparent. For our venture, speed is a big component of what we do. We want to be able to move faster than the average person and trust in our ability to learn over time. But if you're spending time on the narrative, you're in the way of speed, and you're certainly not learning from the facts because, again, you're learning from the narrative versus the true thing. So as much as possible, embracing, here's what happened. Here's what I got right. Here's what I got wrong. This is what I screwed up. This is what I wish I hadn't done. Here's where we're at. What's the best choice moving forward? Here's why we decided this. I think leadership in a lot of books or a lot of corners of the world, it's a lot about the leader's perfect and everybody else is following that judgment. I think today we live in a very vulnerable leadership world. The more vulnerable you are, the more open you are, the more you can get people to buy into where you're going. So my big takeaway right now is embracing transparency.
In a previous episode, Kim Campbell, who's a fighter pilot, she talked about courage. When she described courage, it was very similar to what you're describing, where you have to have the courage to be transparent, to be vulnerable, to do those things, to build trust and loyalty, rather than spending 35 to 40% of your time spinning narratives and trying to just do that. Mm-hmm. It's just a different concept of courage, just allowing yourself to be vulnerable and transparent and give the good, the bad, the ugly all at once. Give people the trust or the benefit of the doubt that they'll listen to it and react in a way that can be helpful.
Totally. And I think, both this is with customers and this is also internally with folks you work with. We spend a lot of time talking about creating the culture of finding the right answers, getting to the best answer. In the beginning of my career, a lot of things were defined by broadcaster and audience. So if you were talking to your customers, the customers were the audience and they were digesting what you were broadcasting. And leadership a lot of times was that way too. We fundamentally believe that the speed of innovation and the way companies are going to evolve and innovate and be created here in the foreseeable future is going to be defined by absolutely as fast as possible getting to the best answer. But that means you have to create a culture where it's not about the highest paid person in the room. And it's not even about walking in and putting your thesis down and defending it tooth and nail. It's about maybe just being comfortable saying, I'm smart enough. I understand the subject matter enough. Here's my gut reaction. I might be wrong, but this is what I strongly believe. And letting the team pick it apart, pull it apart, validate it. There's a side benefit to that if you're a leader. If you say, this is what I believe and here's why, but I'm open to be challenged. If you end up that it's validated, now you have buy-in in a different way than people being told. A lot of goodness there if you get it right. It's not just a binary thing. I think it's an ongoing thing that I remind myself every day.
I like how you describe that as broadcasting to customers in the old style, but now it's not so much broadcasting to customers or employees. It may be starting the conversation saying that this is where we think we want to go, but then it shifts to inquiry where you're trying to get feedback, you're trying to get their insights. You never know what a customer may surprise you with that golden insight that can just change things in a remarkable way.
Absolutely. It's about a dialogue. It builds trust over time with a relationship with, again, customer, employee, peer, colleague, whatever. Once that trust is established, this person is, intellectually honest. They're self-aware. They're curious about getting to the right answer. That doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
But once that's been established, then the best answers come to life. People inherently go into certain scenarios, especially if you're a leader and imagine the most junior person in the room, until they trust and they see it play out a few times, that there's no repercussions for an idea that may not be well thought out. There's no gotcha moments. There's none of that. And that there's a real curiosity to kind of tease out, some of the best ideas I think we've ever come up with have come from ideas that on the surface started out really poorly worded or, weren't even on mark. But I'm always curious on that being the beginning of a thread. If you can kind of create that relationship with everybody around you, then sky's the limit to where you might go and what you might be able to create, what kind of problems you might be able to solve.
It's amazing that the output or the generation of ideas can be so much more powerful and effective when it's generated from a team or a group of people versus one individual of a group. It's just amazing what can come of it once you develop that trust. They feel safe to throw stuff out there and let you pick it apart as well.
Yeah, and it can be quite rewarding, when you see, somebody shepherd an idea or solution to the table that, maybe traditionally wouldn't have been given the mic. As a leader, kind of setting that tone, it becomes quite rewarding and self-reinforcing, because once you have the data points to say, that wasn't just a cool thing to do or something I got to check the box on this month, it's actually a way of getting the best answers and solving the problems, is just making sure you are creating that environment. So yeah, it can be quite rewarding.
Part 3, Red Teaming. In episode 4, Judy Hale shared a metaphor, doors of opportunity. The idea is simple. All around us are these incredible opportunities that we either see or don't see. To be honest, we don't see most of them. The visibility of these opportunities depend on a lot of different factors. One of the factors is the assumptions you have about how you live your life. Mark shares some advice that challenges some of our assumptions. Here's Mark.
Piece of advice I hear myself saying to folks often is to spend the energy and time, curiosity, all the psychology you might apply to others, and you put it inward to find your true authentic self. Because when you find your true authentic self, you tend to find other things that are really important, like words like why. Why do I do what I do? It also, again, goes back to the narrative. It goes back to the other things we talked about. It just allows life to operate at a different level of efficiency. We all are guilty of wasting huge chunks of our time on things, or our lives on things that if you could go back at the end of it and go, oh, highlight that, delete it, that added no value, or
Yeah.
And I don't believe it's that simple, right? I think everything in life teaches you something. I spend a lot of time with young people trying to convince them they can do anything they put their mind to. And then this idea of like, don't buy into maybe what my generation was taught. Well, my favorite anecdote is, the successful, wealthy, retired guy comes across a bunch of kids on the beach drinking some beers. And he says, oh, you riffraff, you guys don't need to go study. And they say, why? He says, so you can get good grades. And they say, why? He says, so you can get into a good university. And they say, why? He says, so you can get into a good corporation and a good entry-level job. And they say, why? He says, so you can work your way up over 20 years and get a really fantastic executive role. And they say, why? So you can have a great retirement. And they say, why? And he says, so someday you can be at the beach drinking beers. And I think there's so much around the rat race that we've been sold. That was definitely, a generation before me. It was the way to go about it. It was probably still true when I started my career. I think we live in a world today where, and certainly this is aligned with the generation. I've got 2 teenagers in my house, and I just see, how different it is. So I don't think they actually need this advice, but it's helpful for people to remember that you can find what is the direct path to where you want to be. You don't have to go through step 1, 2, 3, 9, 12, 18. Unfortunately, most of those steps are going to beat you down over time. They're going to suck the lifeblood out of you. You're going to be exhausted. You're going to have different priorities. You're going to have different obligations. And so early on in your career, my advice is to find that true self and just go straight at it. Like find the most direct path there. And everybody else that comes into your orbit after that, whether it be someone that works for you, somebody you work for, a spouse, a child, a friend, they're all going to be better enriched for those choices you made to just be yourself first and chase that path.
There's a lot to what you are saying that's really important. We don't spend enough time trying to figure out why, first of all. Why is it that we want to go in this direction that we're going? And then realizing where you want to get to and recognizing, well, I may not be on the most direct path to get there. Now, the best path to get there may require a lot of mistakes, a lot of failures, a lot of setbacks, but you can never get there doing what everyone else is doing. All those setbacks, all those mistakes, all those failures add up to lessons that you learn to prepare you to get you in that positive, perfect storm to where you can actually achieve where you want to be and get to your why.
Absolutely. And I've used terms throughout my career. I always point out to people limiting beliefs. you tend to get into a certain path because you have concluded the path you're on is the only possible direction, right? I tried that. That didn't work. Did it really not work? So you end up going down this path where you're justifying your own conclusions. And so now you're pointing towards a direction. And chances are there's a whole bunch of limiting beliefs stacked up along the way that pointed you into this spot. I'll talk to colleagues of mine, friends, and sometimes you'll hear people feeling like they don't want to keep doing the same job, but they make such good money and they got to pay the mortgages and the this and the that. And you hear all the constructions around why they can't do what they really want to do to be happy. And we used to call this red teaming in the military, where it's like, okay, you plan a mission, but then someone else is going to plan the mission to defeat you. And they're going to look at all the things you assume that are your weaknesses and point them out. And when you start to ask people, okay, but what would happen if you just pulled your kids out of school and you sold your home and, you have enough equity there to not worry about things for a heck of a long time? And like you start challenging people's assumptions. And that's an example that's not true for everybody. I'm saying whatever your situation is, chances are you have a series of constructions and limiting beliefs. And I can think of a specific time in my life where I thought the most important thing when I came out of the military was to get my own apartment and my car and start looking the look, walking the walk and playing a role. It puts you on a path. And I remember at one point realizing kind of early that was a path that I wasn't sure it was really for me. But then you conclude I don't have a choice because I have a mortgage and I've got a rent, I've got a lease, I've got a car payment, I've got this. So I got to go grab this job that really isn't going to make me all that happy, but it'll pay the bills. And that's the right thing to do, right?
Yeah.
But challenging, is that the right thing to do? How's that going to look to you in 10 years? Is that going to get you down a path where you just keep finding the next thing that is the right thing to do versus the right thing to do for you? I just don't think we challenge enough of the status quo, even in our own lives, to make sure that you have that feeling of a blank canvas. And anytime I feel very, very trapped, and we all have it, our own worlds, if I ever feel trapped and I don't think I can find a way out of a certain circumstance, I stop and I really challenge, what are my limiting beliefs? Why do I think this is the only path? Why do I feel trapped? Because then you start to realize the universe is way bigger than you thought.
My thanks to Mark McNally. If you'd like to learn more about Mark, go to the show notes. And if you have a question or comment, go to unlabelledarship.com, click the message icon, and leave a voicemail message up to 1 minute. I'd like to thank those who contribute to the show. Your contributions makes a difference because this is an all-volunteer service. I'd like to thank you for listening. This is Gary DePaul. Until next time, lead on.